Hello guys, and welcome to a tutorial on how to install Panic for Oasis, which is SimpliVC's open source alerting and monitoring tool for Oasis nodes. At the moment, the nodes we have are running on the Amber network on testnet, and it'll be soon launched onto mainnet. So if you're going to be running a node on mainnet, I highly suggest you look into our monitoring tool, as it is very important to have a reliable operation of your node if you're working within the Oasis space. So in this case, we're going to have a few components of our alerting tool. We've got the alerting tool itself, which is Panic, and you can break down Panic into multiple modules. You've got the UI module, which is a web UI. You've got the alerter, which is the brains of the alerter, which queries and detects when it should send alerts. And we've also got some other things like a Mongo database, which will be running beside it, and a Redis database too. And on the endpoints, on the nodes, we'll be installing two things. We'll be installing Node Exporter, which exports system statistics related to the RAM usage, memory usage, etc., those kind of things. And we've also got our Oasis API server. What the Oasis API server does is provide an API for Panic to query data related to the Oasis node and its operation. The Oasis node in itself only exposes some data through a local socket, which can only be queried locally. And what this API server does is act as intermediary between Panic and that local socket that can only be queried locally from the node, as we'll be running Panic on a separate VM from the Oasis nodes in this case. So first off, make sure that you have your dependencies installed. You'll need to install Python and pipenv on every single VM, both for Panic VM and on the Oasis node. And then you'll have to install Docker also on the Oasis nodes and on the Panic VM, as we'll be running the API server and the Panic components in Docker. And then you want to run a Docker Compose command on the Panic VM, so make sure to install Docker Compose on the Panic VM. Once you have these installed, as are detailed in this document, we can go on to the next step. The next step is to enable the metrics on your node. So the Oasis node exposes, or can expose if you configure it correctly, Prometheus metrics. This is enabled from in the config file under the metrics tag. So you at the bottom of your config.yml file, you want to put the following: either port 9090 or port 3000. It's up to you what you want to put. Just make sure it's in pull mode, as there's push mode. So enable that and restart your node. And you also want to install Node Exporter. What Node Exporter does is, as said previously, it will be the piece of software that Panic uses to get to know your system stats and be able to monitor those statistics. We have a detailed guide on how to install it, just a few commands, and run it as a service. Once both the Node Exporter and the Prometheus metrics of the node are enabled on all your nodes, we can then go ahead and install the API server on each node you're running. So first off, you want to git clone the Oasis API server. You can install it wherever you'd like. And set up the environment. So what these two commands are, and especially this command, the run setup, is it will give you several prompts on the configuration of your API server. The API server runs in Docker. However, its config files are generated before that through this Python script. And it'll ask you some questions like, do you wish to set up the API server? Yes. Please insert the port you'd like the API server to use. By default, it's port 8080, so we'll keep it at port 8080. It's asking for the node exporter URL is generally HTTP its localhost colon 9100 slash metrics. Don't forget to add the slash metrics, because that is actually where the metrics are exported to. Do you wish to set up the list of nodes? Do you wish to set up the nodes that this API server will expose data of? Yes. And give your node, first node, a name. It allows you to add multiple nodes just in case you have multiple nodes running on the same VM. So in this case, the socket file is the following of our VM. And then we will also give it Prometheus endpoint of our node. Do you wish to add another node? No. And we're also not setting up the Sentry endpoint. With that, we've got the Oasis API server configured. Then we can go ahead and build the Docker image. Once that is building, we'll look into this Docker run command. What this Docker run command is it mounts certain directories and files into the Docker container from your hosted Docker container. So we've got a few variables to fill in the gaps. Once you've built your Docker run command and the container, the image is also built, you can go ahead and turn it on. And when it's running, we can confirm by pinging the API with these commands. You've got a general ping to the API, and you've also got a ping to the node on the API. Give it the name, Oasis_validator in this case, and it's ponged when we ping it. Now we've got the API set up on the validator. Next up is to run Panic Oasis, which will be querying both node exporter and the API server. You want to go ahead and clone Panic Oasis from the repository, and we can immediately start running the components. You've got Mongo to turn on, you got Redis. If you have issues, as you can see here, there may be some differences in the Docker Compose version that are in documentation to yours. So change it from 3.7 to 3.3, for example, the version up there, and run it again and see if it works as it does here. You want to turn on Redis. These will be running on their default ports. And then we can also go ahead and run the UI. Now, the UI also requires a setup, as it has some authentication built into it. And it will ask us for a few things. It will ask us for a username, let's go test, a password, and also a cookie secret. Now, what the cookie secret does is it signs the cookie stored in the browser to avoid tampering. Has documentation details. Once that is done, we can go ahead and also Docker build the UI and then turn on the UI. In this case, we now have Mongo, Redis, and the UI running. With UI running, that means we can finally set up the nodes on Panic through the UI. It will show up with a login page. You want to type in your credentials, login, and you get a page saying that your Panic is not set up. So you want to go on settings, go on main first, give Panic a name, Panic Oasis. If you want to enable Telegram alerts, you put in your details here. I'll have in the documentation a link to how to set up Telegram alerts, how to set up email alerts, Twilio calls, this MongoDB. It's important that it's set up. You want to give it the local IP of the VM, give it the default port, and also any database name you'd like, as it will just use whatever you type in. If it doesn't exist, it will create it. Connect with MongoDB, connection successful. You've got a periodic alive reminder, which when activated sends out alerts every interval to make sure, so that you know that panic is still running. On the other hand, apart from Telegram alerts, you can also control panic through Telegram. And if you'd like the bot to be different from the one that sends out alerts, you can set a different bot here. And then we've got Redis, which we also want to enable and use the ports, the default port and the VM's IP. Connect with Redis, successful, and save config. Next up, in the settings, we'll add a node. In this case, we need to specifically type in the same name we gave the node on the Oasis API server, which is Oasis_validator. You can type any chain you want. You can type AmberNet, and then you want to give the node API server URL. In our case, it is http://8080, and you can test it out. Ping successful. Is this a validator? Yes. And if you want to get your node key, you can go to SmartStake's website, open up your validator, and it will be the node's hash. Node exporter URL will be the same IP :9100/metrics. Don't forget the /metrics. Add node and save. Now you want to save here because it saves your details in a config file. That does not mean that the alerter will read those config files as it is running. You need to restart the alerter for it to reread those files. And lastly, you need to have the repo monitoring set up, as the alerter won't turn on without the config file of the repository monitoring created. So we can just type Oasis, and then we can monitor the general Oasis core repository. Connect with repo, successful, and add repo, save config. So with that monitoring all done, we can now finally turn on the alerter. So you build Docker Compose alerter image, and then Docker Compose up the alerter. Once that is done, up and running, we can go to panic, and we'll soon get the data being shown here. Once that is done, we can refresh panic, and you can see that the metrics are being shown. You've got blockchain specific metrics and system specific metrics. What the monitor status is panic works by means of monitors. You've got monitors for blockchain specific metrics, which queries the API servers, and you've got monitors that query the node exporter metrics of a specific node. You can learn the status of your nodes of a specific network from this table up here. If you add more nodes of AmberNet, for example, they will be listed below this Oasis validator. If everything is green, everything is good. If something is red, it means there are some issues. You can click on this drop down here to find the different chains you have configured on the Panic Oasis. And we can also go to an alert log, which shows all the alerts as they come up and are created by Panic. Then you can also go to the preferences page, which gives you a list, an extensive and complete list of all type of alerts that may happen. On this page, you can also disable them. So they're by default enabled, excluding some, which may be spammy generally. So you can either disable or enable those that you like. You save config, and then you have to refresh, restart the alerter. When I say restart the alerter, I mean the alerter container, the UI, and the other components do not need to be restarted. So that's it for this video. We have major developments coming up within the panic space, new networks, bigger upgrades in terms of how the system works, new alerting channels, so stay tuned for that. Stay tuned to our Twitter for announcements around this. I hope you found this video useful, so thanks for watching.